So this is squatting, not the dog's leg, but the two human feet. The subject is bending forward, squatting over the knees, the feet are facing forward underneath the acetabulum, more or less. And this results in pronation. I don't think anybody would have an argument with that is what is happening. And the arrows on the right foot depict pronation. So this is a biplanar movement. The foot splits apart, it spreads out. The midfoot gets wider, and the ankles dorsiflex during squatting, obviously. And what you can see here is that the right ankle is actually dorsiflexing more than the left ankle. This is quite a useful clinical assessment tool. If you find that the right ankle is dorsiflexing more in weight bearing and less in non-weight bearing when you apply pressure to it, it may be that you have an instability present, because basically you've got a hypomobile that's no longer hypomobile. And the reverse applies as well. If during weight bearing you're getting more movement and less movement with your passive movements, this is with the knee flex as well, then what you might be looking at is a hypermobile that's only there during weight bearing. So you've got an off again, on again hypomobility type of situation. The left ankle is definitely less mobile than the right ankle, and actually, if you look carefully, you can see that the whole medial side of the left ankle is collapsing in slightly. If you were to look at my feet do it, you'd see it very obvious. The whole thing collapses inwards. But this is not the point of this conversation. What we're looking at here is pronation. We're looking at the difference between pronation, supination, weight bearing, inversion, eversion. So this is pronation. It's a biplanar movement. The foot spreads apart and gets wider during this maneuver. Okay, we're standing on our toes, or this person is standing on her toes. I don't think anybody would argue that this is supination. What you can see very clearly on this slide is the two sides of the foot coming together. So they twist around this nearly central axis with the medial and lateral foot coming together and narrowing the foot. That's supination. The heel goes into varus, but the whole foot is supinating. This is not inversion, and inversion is not supination. So this is twisting on the foot. Now, typically this is taught as inversion, eversion. As pronation and supination. Supination when you twist away from that, towards that side, and pronation when you twist away from that side. That's not it at all. This is a uniplanar movement. This is weight bearing inversion and weight bearing eversion. So we got this person twisting to the left, and what we see is the left foot actually inverts and the right foot everts. This is not pronation and supination. This is a very important functional movement. This is how you turn your body. This is not a party trick. This is functional. You really can't do that. And we've seen this all the way through, where subluxations in the foot do not allow the foot to rotate as it should do, and you end up with a long or a short leg from this, or at least the ability to compensate for a long or a short leg. So this is actually a very important functional movement, and it can't be ignored. This, though, is a uniplanar movement, inversion and eversion, not pronation and supination, and it's important that you understand the difference. I'll be coming at the weight bearing mechanics of the foot from a slightly different perspective than you're probably used to, but I think looking at it this way is more intuitive, and it's easier to understand, rather than hindfoot, midfoot, forefoot, because it actually doesn't work that way anyway. And you have to patch things together by doing that, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. So we're going to look at this from the medial and lateral foot, and how they function separately and together. So when we talk about medial and lateral foot, the blue line sort of demarks a border between the two. So this runs between the talus and the calcaneus, then between the navicular and the cuboid, between the cuboid and the lateral cuneiform, and then between the head of the third and fourth metatarsal, and then down through the rays. The two sides of the foot work around this axis. It's an axis of motion, not just an anatomical dividing line. Stuff moves around this, and it's easy to understand pronation and supination when you look at it this way. So this is how we're going to be looking at it, and the anatomy of the foot is set up to allow for this. Between the talus and the naviculum, if you look back in time, first of all, the talus and the calcaneum were originally side by side, and not one on top of the other. But over time, with evolution of gait and coming into vertical upright walking, the talus migrated to the top of the calcaneus. Otherwise, they were side by side. Similarly, the navicular and the cuboid were side by side, and the cuboid was actually two separate bones. So this was one of the cuneiform, or two of the cuneiforms. So there, back in time with the fin and the early terrestrials, there were five cuneiforms. And then of course each one of these articulated with its own metatarsal. So the foot was much more splayed out as the fin was. So this is the way it was originally set up. Now, with time, the foot's become more stable. So we've got the migration of the talus on the calcaneum, the fusion of two of the cuneiforms together that form the cuboid, and so on. There's also joints that allow this type of movement occurring because they've got to be spread apart and get together again and move on each other. So we have a syndesmosis between the navicular and the cuboid. And you could argue actually that the talocalcaneal joint is a syndesmosis, given the presence of ligaments between the anterior and posterior components of the joint. 3 ligaments again, same as there are in most syndesmoses. So these are actually well designed to do exactly that. If we continue to look at the anatomy, what you can see here is the fifth and the first metatarsals are massive compared to the other 3. The first metatarsal is bigger than the fifth, obviously, but they're massive, and these are the ones that take weight and not the other 3 metatarsals between them. So we'll be building on this and going forward from this point. Okay, so let's have a look at pronation, supination, and weight-bearing inversion, eversion. The first figure on the left there shows weight-bearing inversion. This is heel strike. So you come down the lateral calcaneal tubercle and the foot's inverted and dorsiflex as you do so. What this is everything is in the same plane. So this is a uniplanar movement. Whereas pronation and supination, the next 2 slides, are multiplanar movements. This is twisting and untwisting the foot. It's the same as in the arm. Pronation and supination means twisting and untwisting. So on the second slide in, what you can see is pronation. So the 2 arrows depict the movements of the foot, the medial and lateral foot. So these 2 movements are occurring around that axis we talked about through the, I'll call it the midline axis. It's not, it's off midline, but the midline axis here. And what happens is on flat foot, on full flat during the stance, or when you're squatting forward, the medial foot inverts, that is, it laterally rotates, while the lateral foot everts, medially rotates. So the 2 come apart from each other. So we'll go from that position there into that position. So it flattens out. Supination, on the other hand, is where the foot twists inwards. So both sides twist towards each other. The lateral foot inverts and the medial foot everts, and so the foot gets narrower. And this is found at toe off. Actually, as you come from heel, as the heel comes off the ground, it's already started to supinate at that point, and it moves into supination and reaches full supination at toe off. So Eversion is basically eversion in weight bearing. If I twist on my feet, as we saw in the earlier slide, if I twist on my feet, you'll see the foot come up on the outside of it. There, that's eversion. The whole foot is doing exactly the same thing. It's uniplanar movement with the whole foot doing this. And with inversion, it's doing that. So the whole foot is tipping from side to side. The reason this happens, I think, is when you are walking or squatting, your body weight is going down through that functional axis, through the medial and lateral foot, and it splits apart the foot apart in that axis. So we get that spreading. When you come up on toes, they come back together again. With twisting on your feet, your body weight shifts over to one side, and basically it causes the foot to shift over. So if I twist to the right, for example, my right foot will invert, my left foot will, my right foot will invert, my left foot will evert, but they're doing that. If you imagine a pair of skis on the end of your feet, if I squat on the skis get pushed down to the ground. If I turn on the skis turn with me. So you get that movement happening. That is weight bearing inversion, eversion, and squatting, walking, the mid stance phase of walking is pronation and supination, and they are not the same movements. You cannot actively pronate and supinate your foot. I can actively invert and evert my foot. Okay, so heel strike. We strike on the lateral calcaneal tubercle, which actually, so as your weight is being tipped medially by peroneus longus and the first ray is being pulled down to the substrate, the ankle comes into its close packed position, or near its close packed position, as near as it can get with the gastrocs being tight. So, well, not tight, but lengthened. So the cruis grabs hold of the talus. It comes forwards on the talus because the foot's basically stopped moving forward at this point, but the cruis comes forward, and that's the same as the talus coming back. So that's the close pack position of the ankle, or near close pack position of the ankle. And then as body weight continues that anterior movement of the cruis, it immediately rotates with the rest of the leg, and that then drives the talus into medial rotation and brings the head down towards the ground again. Plantar flexion of the ankle now. Or it's plantar flexing the talus. The ankle is still dorsiflex, of course, but the talus is plantar flexing on the navicular. Then that force is transferred to the navicular. That moves down with the talus then into the cuneiforms. They move down on the metatarsals and so on. And this will continue until the heel lifts off the ground, initially passively with your body weight going forward, but then gastrocs also kicks in, and you come up onto your toe. And then you lift the foot off the ground and swing through. So, a weight-bearing foot. In walking, it is pronation, supination. In twisting, it's weight-bearing inversion and eversion. Now, with a long leg, and it depends very much on how your weight falls, but generally speaking, the shorter leg will become inverted rather than supinated to try and lengthen the leg. And I presume that's because the weight is being distributed towards that side and it's not going down the middle of the foot. Either way though, generally speaking, it's going to be inversion. Sometimes the heel will come off a little, and that will give you supination. I don't think it makes too much difference in how you deal with the problem, but you may see one or the other. Anyway, it's not really terribly complicated. You hit if you think about it in these terms, lateral foot, medial foot, the initial forces go down the lateral foot. The weight is then tipped medially by peroneus longus, which also pulls the medial foot, at least the toe of it, down to the ground, and then the overgoing force as your body momentum takes you over your ankle, the ankle close packs and then turns the talus down on the navicular. The navicular then goes down with the talus, cuneiforms of the navicular, and then you hit the already landed first ray. That's it. Not terribly difficult. I hope you found a different way of looking at the foot, if you need a different way of looking at the foot.